Look closely at the survivors of Pompeii, because they reveal a truth that many spend their entire lives trying to understand. When the mountain erupted, it did not ask who was rich or poor, powerful or weak. It showed no mercy to merchants, soldiers, nobles, or ordinary families. In a matter of hours, everything people had spent decades building could no longer protect them. Beautiful homes disappeared beneath ash. Shops filled with valuable goods became silent tombs. Precious jewelry, expensive furniture, and carefully saved fortunes suddenly became meaningless. In that terrifying moment, the greatest treasure a person could possess was not gold. It was the courage to keep walking. This is where the true story of Pompeii begins. Survival was not simply escaping the city. Survival was finding the strength to take another step when every reason to stop surrounded you. Imagine leaving behind the house where your children were raised. Imagine knowing that every family memory, every celebration, every achievement, every dream you attached to those walls had vanished forever. Most people believe losing a house is losing a place. In reality, it feels as though you have lost a part of yourself. Yet the survivors continued forward, because they understood something that fear could never teach. A true ruler is never defined by the kingdom he inherits. He is defined by the kingdom he can rebuild after it has fallen. King Arthur never gathered his knights by promising them a life free from danger. He called them because he knew that courage is not born in peaceful castles. Courage is born when darkness surrounds you, and still you refuse to surrender. The Knights of the Round Table were admired not because they never faced impossible odds, but because they refused to let impossible odds decide their destiny. The survivors of Pompeii lived by that same unwritten code. They had no shining armor, no legendary swords, and no grand castles, yet they carried something even greater, a determination that could not be buried beneath volcanic ash. Think about how easily people today allow fear to become their master. One failed business convinces them they are failures. One rejection convinces them they are unworthy. One mistake convinces them they will never succeed again. But history speaks with a different voice. It tells us that one disaster does not define a life unless you allow it to become the final chapter. The survivors of Pompeii could have remained in the shadows of their loss forever. They could have spent every remaining day mourning what had been taken from them. Instead, many chose to walk toward an uncertain future rather than remain prisoners of a destroyed past. That decision required a kind of bravery far greater than most battles. It is easy to be brave when victory is guaranteed. It is far harder to be brave when you have no promise that tomorrow will be better. Yet that is exactly what these survivors did. Every mile they walked away from Pompeii was a declaration that hope was stronger than despair. Every sunrise they witnessed after the eruption became proof that life still held possibilities beyond the horizon. There is a lesson hidden within their footsteps. The weight that slows us down is often not what we carry in our hands, but what we refuse to release from our hearts. Many of the survivors likely abandoned possessions along the road because they became too heavy to carry. In the same way, every person must eventually decide whether they will continue carrying fear, regret, bitterness, and disappointment, or whether they will set those burdens aside to make room for a new future. No warrior can march into tomorrow while chained to yesterday. Ask yourself this question. If everything you own disappeared before the sun set today, what would remain? Would your confidence remain? Would your integrity remain? Would your determination remain? Because those are the treasures no fire can consume, no storm can wash away, and no volcano can bury. Everything else is temporary. A crown can be stolen, a palace can collapse, An empire can fall, but a courageous heart remains unconquered. That is why the greatest kings in history were remembered not for the riches they possessed, but for the character they displayed when those riches were threatened. The survivors of Pompeii became living proof that the strongest foundation any person can build is not made of stone or marble. It is built from courage that refuses to surrender, even when the entire world seems to be falling apart. When the ash finally settled and the roar of Mount Vesuvius faded into silence, another battle quietly began. It was a battle no army could fight and no sword could win. The survivors stood in a world that no longer resembled the one they had known. The streets that had once echoed with conversation were gone. The marketplaces where friends gathered had vanished beneath layers of ash. The homes they had built with years of hard work had disappeared as though they had never existed. For many, it must have seemed as if their future had been buried alongside their city. Yet history reveals something extraordinary. Many of those who escaped did not allow Pompeii to become the end of their story. They traveled to nearby Roman towns, settled among strangers, rebuilt their businesses, raised families, and slowly created new lives from the ruins of the old. They carried scars that would never disappear, but they refused to let those scars become chains. They understood a truth that every great ruler eventually learns. The end of one kingdom can become the beginning of another. King Arthur knew that Camelot was never simply a collection of walls and towers. Camelot lived within the hearts of those who believed in honor, courage, and purpose. If every stone of the castle had fallen, those values could still build another kingdom. A true kingdom is not protected by its walls. It is protected by the spirit of its people. The survivors of Pompeii proved the very same principle. They may have lost their city, but they refused to lose the will that had built it in the first place. How often do people believe that one ending means everything is over? A failed dream convinces them never to dream again. A broken opportunity persuades them to stop trying. A painful goodbye makes them afraid to trust. But nature itself teaches a different lesson. Every winter eventually gives way to spring. Every night surrenders to dawn. Every forest that burns eventually becomes fertile ground for new life. Why should the human spirit be any different? The survivors could have spent the rest of their lives staring back toward Pompeii, wishing they could reclaim what was gone. Instead, they turned their faces toward the unknown. That decision required more than hope. It required faith. Faith that tomorrow could hold possibilities, even when today was filled with grief. Faith that new friendships could be formed, new homes could be built, and new dreams could still rise from the ashes of old ones. Every great legend begins with uncertainty. No knight of the Round Table knew the outcome before setting out on a dangerous quest. They rode forward not because the path was clear, but because standing still guaranteed defeat. The survivors of Pompeii embraced that same spirit. Every step away from the destroyed city was a step into uncertainty, yet every step also carried the possibility of a better tomorrow. They chose possibility over despair. There is a powerful difference between those who merely survive and those who truly live. Survival keeps your heart beating. Purpose gives your heart a reason to beat. The people who rebuilt their lives after Pompeii refused to exist only as victims of tragedy. They became builders once more. They opened workshops, traded in new markets, formed new communities, and taught their children that life is measured not by what has been taken from you, but by what you choose to create after loss. This is the hidden strength that separates ordinary people from extraordinary ones. Anyone can celebrate when life is generous. Few can create hope when life has taken almost everything away. Yet history consistently remembers those who build instead of those who surrender. Every empire, every city, and every civilization worthy of remembrance was shaped by people who believed that tomorrow deserved another attempt. Perhaps this is the greatest lesson Pompeii leaves for every generation. Your past may explain your wounds, but it does not decide your future. The ashes behind you cannot stop the road ahead unless you choose to remain standing in them. Every sunrise offers the chance to begin again, not because the past has been erased, but because the future has not yet been written. The survivors understood that while they could never recover the city they had lost, they could still build lives worthy of being remembered. That is the mark of true greatness, not preserving yesterday, but having the courage to create a better tomorrow from everything yesterday tried to destroy. As the years passed, the city of Pompeii remained hidden beneath layers of volcanic ash, silent and untouched by time. Houses stood frozen, streets waited without footsteps, paintings remained on walls as though their owners had only just stepped outside. To the world, it seemed that the volcano had won. It had buried an entire city, erased thousands of lives, and left behind nothing but silence. Yet history has a remarkable way of revealing truths that disasters try to conceal. While Pompeii remained trapped beneath the earth, the spirit of its survivors continued to walk beneath the open sky. This is the greatest lesson the eruption leaves behind. A mountain can bury buildings, but it cannot bury determination. Fire can consume possessions, but it cannot consume purpose. Ash can cover roads, but it cannot cover the path of a heart that refuses to surrender. King Arthur understood that the greatest victories were never won by the sharpest sword alone. They were won by the strength of the soul. A knight who lost his shield could still fight. A knight whose horse had fallen could still stand. But the moment a warrior surrendered his spirit, no weapon in the world could save him. The survivors of Pompeii carried no legendary swords, wore no shining armor, and commanded no great armies, yet they possessed the one weapon every great ruler values above all else, a spirit that refused to be conquered. Think about the volcano for a moment. It was one of nature's most terrifying displays of power. Rivers of burning rock, clouds of scorching ash, darkness in the middle of the day, and panic spreading through every street. Against such overwhelming force, human beings seemed small and helpless. Yet 2,000 years later, people do not travel across the world because they admire the volcano. They travel because they are fascinated by the people. They seek to understand their lives, their courage, and their final choices. Time has quietly delivered its verdict. Destruction may capture attention for a moment, but human resilience captures hearts forever. There is wisdom hidden within that truth. The world often appears to reward power, wealth, and status. Empires rise believing they will last forever. Leaders believe their influence can never fade. Cities believe their walls can never fall. Then history reminds them that nothing built by human hands is permanent. The only legacy that truly endures is the character carried within the human heart. How many storms has humanity survived? Kingdoms have fallen, wars have reshaped nations, plagues have emptied streets, earthquakes have shattered civilizations, floods have swallowed entire communities. Yet, after every tragedy, someone has picked up the first stone, planted the first seed, lit the first fire, and whispered the first words of hope. That single act has always marked the beginning of renewal. the strength of humanity has never been found in avoiding hardship. It has been found in refusing to let hardship have the final word. This is why every great legend begins with suffering before it reaches glory. The knights of the Round Table were not remembered because they lived comfortable lives. They became legends because they faced impossible trials without abandoning their honor. Every scar they carried became proof that they had continued forward when others would have turned back. In the same way, every survivor of Pompeii carried invisible scars that no one else could see. Those scars were not signs of weakness. They were symbols of endurance. Many people spend their lives trying to avoid pain at all costs. They believe a perfect life is one without failure, disappointment, or loss. But perfection has never produced greatness. Greatness is born when an ordinary person faces extraordinary hardship and chooses courage instead of surrender. Diamonds are formed under pressure. Steel is strengthened in fire. The human spirit grows strongest when it refuses to break beneath the weight of adversity. Imagine one of those survivors years after the eruption, watching children laugh in a new town, hearing merchants call through busy streets once again, and seeing life return where despair had once ruled. Every smile would have been a quiet victory over the mountain that tried to silence them. Every sunrise would have been proof that hope had outlived catastrophe. Every new beginning would have declared that while tragedy can interrupt life, it cannot imprison the future. Perhaps that is the greatest misunderstanding people have about courage. They imagine courage as a single heroic act performed in one unforgettable moment. But true courage is often much quieter. It is waking up after your world has collapsed and choosing to keep moving. It is carrying yesterday's pain without allowing it to steal tomorrow's promise. It is believing that purpose still exists even when the road ahead disappears beneath uncertainty. The ruins of Pompeii remind us of what was lost, but the lives of its survivors remind us of what can never be taken away. Hope cannot be buried beneath ash. Faith cannot be destroyed by fire. Determination cannot be crushed by falling stone. These are treasures no disaster has ever been able to claim. They belong to those who choose to rise again and again, no matter how many times life tries to knock them to the ground. And that is why the human spirit remains the greatest kingdom ever created. It has no walls for enemies to break, no gates for fear to enter, and no throne that disaster can overthrow. As long as courage lives within the heart, every ending carries the seed of another beginning, and every fallen kingdom leaves behind a soul capable of building something even greater than before. So, what happened to the survivors of Pompeii? They proved that the greatest victory is not escaping disaster. It is refusing to let disaster define who you become. Their city was buried, their homes vanished, and their old lives were lost beneath mountains of ash. Yet the fire of Mount Vesuvius could not burn away their courage, their purpose, or their determination to begin again. They rebuilt not because life was easy, but because they understood that hope is a choice made long before success is ever seen. King Arthur would remind us that every kingdom is tested. Some are tested by invading armies, others by betrayal, others by famine, loss, or forces beyond human control. But every ruler, every knight, and every ordinary soul eventually faces the same question. Will you allow hardship to become your master, or will you become stronger because of it? The ruins of Pompeii still stand today, silent beneath the Italian sky, visited by millions who come to witness one of history's greatest tragedies. But the most powerful part of the story cannot be found in the streets buried beneath ash. It lives in the footsteps of those who walked away with nothing but hope. They remind us that while the world may destroy what we have built, it can never destroy the strength to build again. Remember this whenever life shakes your foundations. Your failures are not your identity. Your losses are not your destiny. Your darkest day is not your final chapter. The volcano may have ended a city, but it did not end the human spirit. And as long as courage remains alive within your heart, no storm is powerful enough, no setback is permanent enough, and no defeat is final enough to stop the person you are destined to become. Because, in the end, history does not remember those who lived without trials. It remembers those who faced impossible odds, rose from the ashes, and proved that the strongest kingdom any person will ever rule is the one built within their own soul.